You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner on the Old Testament historical books. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders, and I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner. We're in part 2 of our look at Judges, and instead of a Hebrew word of the day, let's just dig into our overview of the actual Judges
in the book of Judges. Let's just do a little summary. Remember what we learned in the last part? We learned that God brought these judges, and what did we find out about the word judges?
It's a little bit broader in definition than just what we may typically think of as a judge. It also includes the idea of a deliverer.
Again, not all of them have the idea of a deliverer, but a good, I think, is like 6 of them do. And so they must have both aspects in it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at Othniel. Othniel's the first one, and it says that God raised up Othniel. And remember, he's Caleb's younger brother. And it says the Spirit came upon him, and he defeated Cush's Ramathaim. And then there was rest for 40 years. So, again, okay, there's just like 5 verses on this guy. But obviously, he was one. And then it was a major victory because for 40 years now, they're going to have rest. So it's kind of interesting that it doesn't say much. But notice it said the Spirit came upon him. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through and learn a little about what the Spirit does in the Old Testament. So let's not assume that the word Spirit meant a person in the Old Testament, because remember Deuteronomy 6:4 says, "Behold, O Israel, your God is one." And they would not, I don't think they'd been aware of any parts of God. So when they have the Spirit coming from God, let's see what the text actually says, okay? And then second thing I think we need to think about is it does talk about what the Spirit does, more like his activities. Doesn't really talk about his entity necessarily, but what he does. So let's look at some of these passages. So I've actually got them here. Genesis 1:2 says, "The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters." Okay, so we've got the Spirit of God like hovering over creation. And then right after that, what you're going to have is God starting to create it, right? So it in my mind, it sounds like it's a power of God hovering over creation, getting ready to start creating. All right. In Exodus 31:3, it says, "I have filled him." He's talking about the different people that are going to help build the tabernacle. And it says, "I filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, in knowledge, and in all kinds of craftsmanship." Well, all right. That certainly doesn't sound like a person being given to him, does it? It sounds like it's a power or a wisdom kind of thing. Then in Exodus 35:1, it says, "He filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom and understanding and in knowledge and all craftsmanship." So it's another, Numbers 11:31 or 29 says, "But Moses said to him, 'Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and the Lord would put his Spirit upon all of them.'" See, there it sounds like his Spirit would be on them so that they would judge well, right? So they could help, and even prophesy.
Right.
Okay. So it's more of again, a power, it sounds like. Numbers 24:2.
Yeah.
"And Balaam lifted up his eyes and saw Israel camped by tribe by tribe, and the Spirit of God came upon him." Now, remember, Balaam's a pagan prophet, and he has the Spirit of God coming upon him to tell them a message that they needed to hear. Okay. Judges 3:8, it talks about the Spirit of God coming upon him, and he judged Israel. "He went out to war and gave Cush's Ramathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hands, so he prevailed over Cush's Rashathaim." So basically, we got the Spirit coming on him. So he judged Israel, but almost like he delivers him from these people, right?
Right.
Yeah, and then Judges 6, 34. "So the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called together to follow him." So again, it's like the Spirit comes upon Gideon to do a job for him, almost. Judges 11:29 says, "Now the Spirit of God, the Lord came upon Jephthah. So he passed through the land of Gilead and Manasseh, and he passed through Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead, he went to the sons of Ammon. And in the sons of Ammon, he's going to go and defeat them." So again, God's got a job that he needs Jephthah to do, and he
Yeah.
empowers him to do it, basically.
Right.
All right. Judges 14:6. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so that he tore him as one tears a young goat. This is Samson. He had nothing in his hand, but he did not tell his father or mother. That's when he rips this line apart. And then 14:19, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of them, and took their spoil and gave the changes of clothes to those who told the riddle. And his anger burned, and he went up to his father's house. See, here's the Spirit of God coming upon Samson, and he rips Philistines apart. So it's not like, well, that does demonstrate power. Okay, so I'll give you that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Judges 15:14. He came to Lehi. The Philistines shouted as they met him, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so that the ropes that were on his hands were as flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds dropped from his hands. This Samson must have been extremely strong.
Right.
But when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, he'd do miraculous things almost. Yeah. All right. There's a couple more. Most of them are talking about that same kind of thing. Most of the rest of the. Oh wait, here's one when it comes upon Saul. Okay. For Samuel 10:6. Then the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you mightily, and you shall prophesy with them and be changed into another man. That's talking about Saul. And then in 10:10, it says, and they came to the hill. Behold, a group of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him mightily, so that he prophesied among them.
Yeah.
And then chapter 11:6, the Spirit of God came upon Saul mightily when he heard these words, and he became very angry. Well, that doesn't sound like kind of the same thing. And these are the same. All the rest of these are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So it seems like to me, from reading these passages, it's more like a power from God that comes upon people.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting because it seems to be a gift or a power from God to do these different things, but all of them is doing a job for God.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about it, in the New Testament, when the Spirit comes into people, what it's supposed to do is to help them overpower sin. And so now we learn in the New Testament that the Holy Spirit is a person, right? And it comes into us. But the main job of the Holy Spirit is to help us to live for God. So I'm wondering if there's a real similarity in what the Old Testament and New Testament have as to what the job of the Spirit is. It's to help bring power to it into a person, or to help them to be able to do a job for God.
Yeah.
And in the New Testament, it's the same kind of thing. What you learn in the New Testament that you didn't know from the Old is that now it's a third person of the Trinity.
Right.
And but remember, in the Old Testament, it sounds like it's a power coming from God. Well, that's not too much different than in the New Testament. Only now we know it's a separate person from God, but it's all in one person. Right. So it's interesting. It seems to me like there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some differences once you get to the New Testament. I think by New Testament time, God clarifies it a lot more, but there are some similarities that help you know how it started in the Old Testament. And if you knew what was happening in the Old Testament, when God got to the New Testament and started explaining what the Holy Spirit was going to do, it would make perfect sense to them.
Yeah, there was kind of a framework already built in to help that understanding.
Yeah. So I think that's what God was doing, is he didn't want. Now, remember, I actually argue he didn't tell them about the Spirit being a third part of the Trinity, because then they would have thought that was polytheism.
Right.
So he's real careful not to do that, but he can do it by saying it comes from God, and it gives them power to do jobs for him and things like that. And that fits really well into the New Testament too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So does that make some sense?
I think so. Yeah. That's a pretty interesting idea. I know that can get really complicated, but it does seem to fit in. I think the way that it makes the most sense to me is that idea of it's setting up the framework for further understanding. And it doesn't contradict what we learn.
Exactly. Later. That's actually really important, isn't it? God can never go back and say, oh, I didn't mean this, but he can add more to it to help clarify it.
Yeah.
Let me just let me give you a summary here. What was the time of the judges like? Well, it was a time when it was really wicked and stuff like that, and God's going
Yeah.
to use the Spirit to come upon people to do a job for Him.
Yeah.
When we get in the New Testament, Romans 8:9 says, "However, you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you. But if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he does not belong to Him."
Hmm.
Romans 8:9 is pretty clear. Is if you're a believer, you've got the Spirit in you,
Yeah.
and if you don't have the Spirit, then you're not a believer.
Right.
And in John 14 is, in my mind, a really clear passage too. It says, "I will ask the Father, and He will give you another helper." That word "another" is another of the same kind. So there's a word "alas" that means another of the same kind. So
Yeah.
He's going to be like Jesus and the Father. Okay.
Mm.
Okay. And it says that He will be with you forever. That is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it does not know Him.
Right.
I'm sorry, does not see Him or know Him.
Yeah.
But you know Him because He abides with you and will be in you.
Yeah.
Notice He's making a distinction. John is before Jesus went up into heaven, right? And was resurrected. So
Yeah.
He's saying that in this time period, He will abide with you. And that's how I understand in the Old Testament, He came upon people. He didn't actually indwell them, but He came upon people
Oh.
to do a job for Him.
Yeah.
But then He says, but He will be in you, meaning
Yeah.
He's talking about a time in the future, will be, sounds like,
Yeah.
when God is going to be indwelling His people.
Right.
So it seems like John 14 is making a real clear distinction between what was happening in the Old Testament and
Right.
what's going to happen in the future now that Jesus is going to die on the cross, and God is He's going to ask God to send Him another helper.
Right.
One
It's
that
kind
will
of
then
demonstrating
live
that
with Him.
progression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that verse really helps us understand that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. All right. Now let's go to Ehud. Okay, so we've talked about the first one.
Yeah.
The reason I stuck that Spirit in there is because
It's helpful.
it's going to, and it's going to say several times that the
Yeah.
Spirit is going to come upon these various judges.
That's right.
And so we kind of need to get that out of the way right at first.
Yeah.
All right. Ehud, the Israelites served the king of Moab for 18 years.
Mhm.
And Ehud is left-handed. He's a Benjaminite, and it often says that the Benjaminites were left-handed, and they could. One of the key phrases that they could sling a sling at a hare and hit it. And I always thought that hare was those like a rabbit.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that. It means the kind of hair. In Hebrew, it's a different word. It's the kind of hair like is on your head.
Really?
So
it's very
yeah. So I
accurate.
mean, that shows you how accurate they are. Yeah. Now, him being left-handed is also going to be part of this story because he stabs the king with a dagger. He makes this dagger, and the dagger is only about 12 inches long. And at that point, it was pretty much a new weapon. So they knew about swords and they knew about other kind of weapons, but a dagger was kind of a special one, and that's going to work perfectly because he's going to put it inside his thigh. And remember, they check on the outside because that's where, if you're right-handed, you would pull it from the side and you do it that way. But because this is a new weapon and he puts it on the inside, they pat him down and didn't even catch it.
Right.
Does that make sense?
So
even that he's being left-handed makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, also the dagger it's about 12 inches. Oh, can I also show you up at the top of this slide? Do you see how the daggers are made?
Yeah.
It's got the bronze part of it. It probably was bronze at this point. It was melted inside the mold, and then they would put a handle on it separate from that. Okay, so here's a dagger, and he's got it inside his thigh, so he can pull this out with his left hand, and it would be perfect for a bat. They wouldn't even know it was there.
Right.
And also, it's long enough that when remember, it says the king of Moab is so fat that when he's stuck in the dagger, it closes in afterwards. But it must have got his heart too, because he can't even call out. So he stabs it in, and it must have just been far enough to get to his heart. And that 12 inches is about probably enough to do that.
Right. Yeah.
So all those little ideas actually help us understand that story better.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Okay. Then what happened is I'm sorry. They had actually given him tithe and stuff like that, because they had tribute that they had to bring to them. So they brought him the tribute, and then they take off. And it says that Ehud gets to the gods. So apparently the Moabites had placed their gods around the outside of their territory to protect them.
Yeah.
So he got to there, and then he comes back by himself. So Ehud is kind of nice. He doesn't make all those other ones. I mean, if somebody's going to do this and they aren't going to know about it, man, poor the other guys that are with him. If it doesn't work, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
So Ehud does this all by himself, and he goes in and he's got a brilliant plan. He says, just tell him that I got a message from God for him.
Right.
What he didn't know is that the message from God is that he's not going to live any longer.
Right.
Okay. So he stabs the king with the dagger and then locks the door, and that gives him enough time to get out. They don't even know that he's died for quite a while, because they've locked him in his room, and they don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
All right. Then the Israelites, then he calls the Israelites, and they come after him and chase the Moabites out of the land. And then it says that he gave them rest for, I think it was 80 years. Yeah. It says they have undisturbed rest for 80 years. Yeah. So once again, that's got to be just that area of Ephraim, and not the whole land, probably.
Kind of a regional thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ehud's quite, now notice these ones that have been given a pretty detailed story, like Ehud, that you needed to know several of those elements for that story to really make sense. Yeah. So you've got, it's a kind of an amazing story, but it's there to help us understand what this period of Judges was like. And they go into great detail on Ehud. The next one, Shamgar, it says he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. You know what an ox goad is? It's like a stick. If you want an ox to go a certain way, you poke him on the one side, and he'll turn his head away, and he'll go that direction, or you do it on the other side. So I've got some pictures here of what ox goads would look like. Yeah. But he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and he gets one verse.
Right.
Well, what's that? Ehud gets almost a whole chapter, and we've got one verse, and he killed. Ehud kills one person.
Right,
it's a pretty major person, of course. Yeah, but Shamgar, I tell you, with a stick, basically. Yeah,
he seems
a little
successful.
more than a stick, but yeah. So it's not whether they do amazing things. It's how it's put this way to let us know. Okay, so he can tell us that he killed 600 Philistines in one verse. Okay, but it has to. Right. But Ehud, they had to explain more so that you knew how it happened.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not that one did an amazing thing and another one didn't do amazing things, because both of these are pretty amazing. Yeah. But it's there's that they need to understand it, and so it takes a little longer.
Yeah. How do you make sense of the story, basically?
Yeah. Deborah and Barak are the other one. Jabin is the main king of the Canaanites at this time. Remember, he's in the north, and we talked about this probably when we were in Joshua, that Hatzor was a major area up there. In our map, you can see it's right up there by the Sea of Galilee. But remember, I told you that Hatzor is such a major tell that initially they excavated it, and they did the top of it, and they thought, oh man, this is a pretty good sized tell. I think it was like 20 acres. But then they started to dig on what they thought were the fields of Hatzor, found out that was part of the city too. So this city was huge. And that's, I think, one of the reasons God had to, remember, Joshua actually burned Hatzor and destroyed it that way. Yeah. But apparently by this time it's now rebuilt, and it's stronger than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's that Jabin, and it says he severely treated Israel for 20 years. Man, you can imagine after 20 years, you're going to be pretty upset with this guy, I would think.
Sure, yeah.
And Barak says that he'll go if Deborah will go. It almost makes it sound like he's a little scared and he will go. Right. But remember, Deborah is the one that's actually the judge. Mm-hmm. So she's the one that hears from God. So I think Barak is saying, well, I'm not going to go unless I have God's blessing. So you'll have to go with me. Yeah. So I think that does make some sense. Yeah. All right. So they do go and defeat Sisera. Jabin's general is the main one that they're going to fight. And his name is Sisera. And Jael runs a tent peg through Sisera's head. And that's how it says a woman killed Sisera. Well, the way he did it is he was fleeing from. The map actually helps us. He was fleeing from that Jezreel Valley area, and he's heading north, and somewhere. I don't know, could have been 10 to 20 miles. So he's fleeing, being chased by these Israelites. So no wonder he's probably exhausted. So he gets to jail tent, and he asks if he can go in, and he wants some water, and she gives him milk. Milk was brilliant move, because milk will, you always know that warm milk if you want to go to sleep. It's that kind of thing. So it actually helped. He falls asleep, and she kills him while he's sleeping. But that's if you think about it, here's a woman wiping out a major general of the Canaanites.
Yeah.
All right. When the Israelites defeated Jabin, there's Deborah's song, and it talks about. There's a whole chapter on how how amazing that was that Jael had killed this major general. Yeah. And it says the land was quiet for 40 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's neat. Here's verse 21 in chapter 4, I think. Yeah. But Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and seized a hammer in her hand and went secretly to him and drove the peg into his temple. And it went through into the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted. So he died.
Yeah.
So
I'd say so.
Think about that. If anything would have gone wrong, Jael would have been in big trouble. Yeah. So she was a brave woman. Then we've got Gideon. Gideon's got some amazing stories too. And Gideon, the first time the angel comes to Gideon and tells him that he's going to defeat the Canaanites or the Midianites, he goes, obviously you got somebody else. That's not me. Let me read verse 12 for you. It's kind of neat. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior." Then Gideon said to him, "Oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which the fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hands of Midian." Now, it in another place, it talks about the Midianites every spring or every fall, as after they got their crops growing and stuff, these guys would come across and just like locusts eat everything. And that happened for 6 years. You can imagine. In fact, when the angel finds Gideon, remember he's in a cave,
right.
and he's beating out his grain. That's the worst place to beat out grain if you're going to try to get the husks to go away. Yeah. You usually do it on the top of a mountain on a threshing
so you get
floor.
The breeze, right?
Yeah, and so this is the worst place possible, and yet he's doing it there because he's scared to death that the Midianites are going to come and steal it the minute he's got it ready.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's. I'm sorry, I said 6 years. It was for 7 years they kept doing that. So you can imagine if you do all the work of getting crops ready and then there's no harvest. You can see how that would be terrible for these people.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So God told him to tear down the Asherah pole. So that gives you also a little clue as to what things were like in Israel. So he was kind of afraid, so he did it at night, and then he offered a bull to God on the altar. The Asherah pole was probably made out of wood, so he cuts it up and uses that as an altar. Then the people want to kill him. So another thing, they want to kill him because he's torn down this Asherah or Asherah pole to the false gods. And his father was so wise. He said, "Well, if that's true, let Baal fight against him. If he did it to Baal, then let Baal punish him." Yeah, so that's where Gideon's name becomes "Let Baal Contend." So it's kind of neat. So he carries that name after that. Yeah. All right. So first, so the Midianites are coming across, and he calls on Asherah and Zebulun and Naphtali for troops, and 32,000 of them came. Wow. That again tells you that's got to be really bad. Otherwise, why would so many warriors come to fight off the Midianites? Okay. Yeah. Well, God tells him that's too many. Now. Anyway, so he gets down to 22,000, and he says, even that's too many. In between this, Gideon's kind of a chicken. So remember, he does a fleece. There's several things that God does to help him get encouraged. One is a fleece, and he puts the fleece out, and one time it's going to have water on it, and everything around it's dry, and then the next
and then it'll be the
time opposite. So here's God, trying to encourage him that he can do it, and Gideon is just scared to death.
Right.
Now, I can understand that. Remember, it says that the Midianites were like the sand on the sea that came across. So there's tons of them, and I'm assuming that what's going on is that he's just afraid if anything goes wrong, they're dead, right?
Yeah.
So another time he tells them to go up and into the Midianite camp and to listen to what they're saying. And basically they're saying that, there's this barley loaf rolling down a hill, and it smashes into the tents, and they go, "Oh, that's nothing but Gideon. That's got to be Gideon that's going to destroy us." And so that was another time that encouraged him.
Right.
Okay, I got to tell you this story about fleeces.
Yeah.
I was about 20. Okay, and there was this girl named Debbie Sue, that I really liked. And so she put out a fleece because she couldn't make up her mind between me and Dana the boat boy. I couldn't believe this, but okay. So she made a fleece and said, the next person that comes around the corner, that's who I'll date. And it was Dana the boat boy. Oh. What a mistake, right? Oh, man. So I do that to tell you that fleeces are really a bummer. You don't want to go with that. No, but let's think about it. In Gideon's time, it makes some sense to do this, right? Because he's trying to see if God wants him to for sure go against these Midianites. Yeah. Today, I don't think we should be using fleeces. You've got the Holy Spirit living inside you, right? We should be having him guide us, and other people, other good Christians that you trust and stuff like that, and go to his word. But you don't need to go to a fleece. I think a fleece is the wrong way to go about it. Have God use the Holy Spirit to convict you and tell you what to do is much better. So I don't blame Gideon for using fleeces, but I think for us today,
we don't need to pull that.
Yeah, I think it's the wrong way to go.
Yeah.
Okay. And plus, it didn't do too well in my life, so I'm really upset. All right. So God gets them down to 300 men. Remember, it's the ones that keep their head up and lap out of their hand.
Yeah.
In one sense, that's kind of a neat way to do it, because the people, if they're going down and lapping up water with their head right above the water, an army person could just come right through and chop off their heads. But if a person dips down their hand with water and drinks it like that, they're still looking. So actually, the 300 men were probably the most capable of being soldiers too.
Sure, yeah.
So even though they're not going to need to worry about that, right? Because these 300 people, they don't even have a sword in their hand. In one hand, they got this pitcher and this thing, and the other hand, they got a trumpet. No swords at all. But God used that to scare these Midianites enough that they would start fighting with each other.
Yeah.
Okay. So, because when it's dark, you wouldn't have any clue what was going on, and they probably saw these 300 lamps, and they assumed that probably that meant there were a whole bunch of people. Besides, most people aren't going to be holding lamps, so that's probably just the leaders of the people, and the soldiers are out doing the job. So I can see why the Midianites would have been scared, and it worked perfectly. That's exactly what God needed.
Right.
Okay. Well, does that make sense?
Yeah. That's a good one.
Okay. And then one other thing that's important. Note, I haven't got the picture there but it was actually, the place where it happened was at a spring, called Mara. I don't have a picture of where it is. I think I had it on an earlier map. But remember, then what's going to happen then, as soon as they get the Midianites fleeing, then they're going to call all these people to come and go after them. And they have this, which is really funny. They have this problem with the people of Orb. They chase in Orb and Zeb, and these two cities are Israelite cities, and they won't even give them any help. And their response is, well, is the hand of Orb and Zeb in yours that we should give you help? I think what they're worried about is if this ever backfires,
Right.
Orb and Zeb are going to come after them.
Right.
So, but these are Israelites, and so when Gideon gets really upset with them, and when he comes back, he actually punishes them and destroys those two cities. We'll see that in a minute. But one other thing happens that's really interesting in chapter 8. Here's what it says. Then the men of Ephraim came to him and said, what is this thing that you have done to us by not calling us when to fight against the Midianites? And they contended with him vigorously. But he says to them, what have I done in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? Now remember, Abiezer is his father. So he's saying that isn't what you've done in conquering these two kings and catching them. They were the ones that fled, that chased them afterwards. And what he's saying is, why didn't you call us to begin with? And well, remember, he only needs 300 men, and God is the one that's telling him. So these guys get all upset that they didn't call him. Okay. Right. Verse 3 says, God has given the leaders of Midian, Orb and Zeb, into your hands. And what was I able to do in comparison to you? Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. So Gideon, he's actually kind of interesting person. He seems like he's a real chicken. Right. But then he does some amazing things when God asks him to, and he's very humble. I mean, this suggests to me that he's quite humble. This is going to be important because later a similar thing is going to happen with Jephthah, and look, we'll see what Jephthah does. Okay, but it doesn't happen here. Okay. Yeah. All right. Here's the two cities. One is Sukkoth and one is Penuel. The leaders of Sukkoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands? That could be really literal. That could mean, do you remember, there are some Assyrian pictures of people cutting off the hands of their enemies so that they would know how many people they had killed in battle. So it may be saying, literally, have you got their hands to say that he's actually defeated? Yeah. All right. Okay, that we should give bread to your army. And Gideon said, all right, when the Lord has given Zeb and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will thresh your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. And when he comes back, he does that. And I think you can see why. Yeah. Also, Zeb and Zalmunna actually killed Gideon's brothers. And so both of them get killed. And Gideon makes it real clear is because they killed his brothers. If you'd have left them alone, he says, I would have let you live, but you didn't. Yeah. So Gideon, can you see the difference between Gideon? He starts off as a big chicken, but look at this. This is amazing. So he's changed a lot. Yeah. I'm kind of amazed. Yeah. All right. Gideon made an ephod out of the spoil, and they actually come to him and ask him if he'll be their king, and he says no, but I'll make an ephod for you. An ephod was a priestly garment, element, right? So so I'm going, why would he do that? So it almost says, okay, I won't be your king, but I will be your priest. And so later on, it becomes a snare to the Israelites too. So, and then they have 40 years of peace after that, it says. Now, it's interesting. After Gideon, apparently after he dies, Avimelech starts a conspiracy, and he actually goes to Shechem and he asks them, would you rather have somebody? Gideon had a son from a concubine, and that's this Avimelech. So he's acting, and apparently she was from Shechem. So he goes and says, wouldn't you rather have somebody that's related to you rule over you than have these Gideon's children who aren't related? And they buy that, and so they do it. And then he kills all of Gideon's sons. Gideon's got 70 sons. That actually tells you that's really something too. Because remember, normal people didn't have that many sons. So obviously this battle has really put Gideon on top, and maybe it went to his head. Right. Yeah. Oh, well. All right. So the only one that doesn't get killed is a guy named Jotham, and Jotham is the only son that's spared, and he actually comes to the Shechemites and tells them a parable, and the
Hmm.
parable is brilliant. Okay, let me see if I can explain it to you. First,
Okay.
they go to it's in this parable. They go to the olive tree and ask the olive tree to reign over them, and he says, "How can I do that? I have these gifts that make men enjoy, that bless God and man. So I can't do it." Then they go to the fig tree, ask the same thing, and he says basically the same thing.
Hmm.
Then they go to the grapevine, basically the same thing. But then they go to a bramble, and the bramble says something like, "Oh, if you really want to make me your king, come and take refuge in my shade." Well, you know what a bramble is? It's like little
Right.
bushes, right? How much
Yeah.
how much shade does a little bramble have? And the answer is
Right.
none. So it's what it's doing is it's saying that the olive tree and the fig tree and the grape tree, those were all other Gideon's other sons that were actually very qualified and actually were good men.
Yeah.
They've chosen Avimelech, who's a bramble, to do to
Yeah.
their and he thinks he's all great, to rest in his shade. So he
Right.
actually tells them that if what you're doing is proper, then what's going to happen is that Avimelech is going to tear you apart and
Mm.
destroy you. And actually
Yeah.
it does. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a brilliant parable, and it makes it really clear what he's getting at.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, there's another guy named Jael that boasts about how Avimelech is not doing his job, and that if he was leader, he could do better. And Avimelech has him killed. All right,
Hmm.
then he punishes all the people of Shechem. And what's happening is he gets all the people in the tower, and then he starts the tower on fire, so burns all of Shechem's leaders.
It's
Yeah,
terrible.
so that was Jotham's story, and he said that parable was actually going to come true, and actually it did. Okay,
Right.
and then Abimelech is killed at a place called Thebez by a woman with a grinding stone. I've got a picture here of what a grinding stone would look like. My guess it's the upper millstone, because it actually tells
Hmm.
you that, and that's something that is easier. You could this second, the underneath grinding stone would be so big it'd be almost impossible to throw that down.
Yeah.
But a little the one on top is much smaller, and she threw that down, actually hit him. And then he says to one who's next to him to kill him, because he doesn't want it to be known that a woman has killed him, because that would be such an embarrassment for a ruler, or
Hmm.
for even an army person, a
Right.
warrior. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that takes care of Abimelech. He's not even one of the judges. He's just of a city, and he was a ruler of a city.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because it's connected with Gideon, it gets tucked in here too.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
again, notice how Gideon is really spelled out and really strong,
Yeah. A couple
really
chapters,
long.
right?
Yeah, and it's because so many things have happened there. And so I think
Right.
it's important for them to know all these things.
Yeah.
And then we got two shorter ones, Tola and Jer. It doesn't hardly say anything about them, other than they both ruled over Israel, one for 23 years and one for 20 years. And then
Hmm.
Jer, it says, has 70 sons. So again, he was probably a pretty powerful person,
Right.
but
Right.
very little is said. At that time, it talks about Israel being very wicked, and the
Mm.
Amorites were going to come and punish them. So a lot of this stuff was in the Judges there. Then we've
Yeah.
got this story about Jephthah. Jephthah was the son of a concubine that was kicked out of Gilead, and he lives over in a place called Tov. Can you see on the map a place called Tov? It's like on
Yeah.
the very outskirts of the land of Israel. In fact,
Yeah.
it doesn't even look like it is, but if anything, it's on the border. Um,
Right.
uh, Jephthah lived in Tov, and the Ammonites call for help for him, and he says, "I'll help you if I can become your king afterwards." So he talks. The king of Ammon says, "Here, I'll come over and serve you, I'll be your king,
Mm.
the Ammonite king." But he says
Yeah.
he's going to gouge out the right eye of every one of the Israelites. So, I mean, obviously he was trying to start a war, right?
Right.
So they got to get somebody to protect them, and Jephthah is going to be the one. that God brings.
Yeah.
All right. This is another passage that actually tells us, it says that they had the land for 300 years. Now, if Jephthah is about 1100, which is probably about the time that he would have been judge, that means, again, put that back for 300 years, and that's about 1400 again when they come into the land.
Yeah.
So that's the second verse that actually helps give us some dates on when this thing happened.
Dating.
Yeah. All right. Here's Jephthah. This is one of the most important verses. So 11:30 says, Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed give the sons of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. Okay. I'm sure Jephthah was thinking some animal is going to come out of his thing, and he'd offer him up as a burnt offering, even if it's the best of his flocks and herds. Okay.
Yeah.
So what happens, and I think you know the story, instead, his daughter comes out, and it's his only daughter. So that means, so with that's actually doubly bad, because it's his only daughter. First of all, he loved his daughter, I'm sure. So to have her be killed would be a first blow. But the second thing is, that means that's all. He has no offspring after that. Right. So that means that now his line is going to be cut off. So that's probably why it says that the women are going to weep for her every year on that date from then on, because that will help remind them of Jephthah, who delivered them, and that kind of thing. So she wouldn't have any offspring. So this will be a way of making sure that Jephthah is still remembered. Does that make sense? So it is a pretty important statement there.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually think that he actually puts her to death. The Hebrew word olah usually means burnt offering, and I don't know of any other term for that. He may not be familiar with the Mosaic law. And he did not want to make God mad. Remember, he's living on the very outskirts. Do you remember when when Jonathan broke a vow that Saul had made, and the next verse he gets out of it? Well, it's very possible he knew that the law, you could do an evaluation and you could pay a certain amount of money to pay God back for the person so they wouldn't die. Yeah. I doubt that Jephthah had any idea of that. So I figure that makes sense. He's living on the outskirts of the land, probably not a real godly guy, and just doesn't have any idea that this is a possibility. Yeah. Clearly it was a rash vow, and the Bible does not condone it. Right. But I don't think he knew about how to get out of it either. Yeah. It must have been very unusual for him to commemorate every year, but I think that's because it's going to cut off his line. Okay. Verse 31 is a wow, and it probably means and. So he's going to offer it to the Lord and offer it up as a burnt offering. Oh, okay. So I think it means both of those. And then I'm sure it was a promise of an animal sacrifice would be a normal vow. So I think that's what he's thinking.
Yeah, it would fit the normal kind of pattern.
Yeah. Some people have argued it's him dedicating her to the temple. Jephthah was a God-fearing person that would not disobey him like this. Well, that's not true at all. As far as we know about Jephthah, he's not a God-fearing person. He's afraid of the gods, but that doesn't mean he's got any moral aspect to him. Yeah. Their second argument is that he had the Spirit of the Lord on him, so he could not blatantly disobey the law. And he's in Hebrew 11, the Hall of Faith. Yeah, now think about that. It says he's got the Spirit of the Lord on him, so he couldn't blatantly disobey the law. Don't we have the Spirit of God living in us, and don't we still sin?
Right.
So it seemed like to me that's a pretty poor argument again. Yeah. And then he's in the Hall of Faith because he obeyed God, and God used him, and he offered it to the Lord. I think that was showing that he actually cared what God said. So I think that's it. And then the daughters bewail her virginity, not her death, in chapter 11, verse 39, because it says she knew not a man, not worth saying if she's killed. That argument's, again, not very strong because remember I told you it's going to cut off his line,
Yeah.
and that's going to be really important to her. And
Yeah.
and if she's being dedicated to the temple, I'm wondering why that's such a bad thing. Isn't that remember Samuel was offered to the temple, and wasn't that a real honor?
Right.
So I would have thought her going to the temple would have been a real honor for her. And
Right.
that this doesn't sound like it's going to be a real honor.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a very strong argument. And we do know that women served in the temple. Okay, I'll give you that. Human sacrifice is wrong. I
Sure.
think we all agree with that.
Yeah. Right.
One of their arguments is Leviticus 27, 1-18 allows for redemption of a person in the case of a stupid vow, I usually call it.
Right.
But I would actually argue that is true, but I'm not sure he knew that. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, and he argues, they argue that the vav in 1131 could be or. Should be he offered to the Lord or offered as a sacrifice. And can be that, but I don't see any really good reason to think that they're different things. Okay. Yeah. All right. Does that make sense? So I'm going to argue that he actually put her to death. Yeah. All right. Here's what it says. And she said to her father, let this thing be done for me. Let me first be alone for 2 months, that I may go to the mountains and weep because of my virginity and I and my companions. And he said, go. And he sent her away for 2 months, and she left with her companions and wept on the mountains because of her virginity. Meaning she's never going to have children, right? And never be able to carry on the line. Yeah. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, and who did to her as according to the vow which he had made. And she had no relations with a man. Thus she became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went yearly to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite for 4 days in the year. So it seems like to me it's all explained by understanding that that's to commemorate Jephthah, what Jephthah had done for us, and that now they won't forget about it. Right. Where if he didn't have any offspring, that would happen probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's what a house would probably look like in the time of Jephthah. So I put a red box around the outside. That would be the wall around everything. And then they'd have a barn on one side. And then right connected with it, they'd have the house. So the thing coming out the front, the front gate, everything from an animal to a person would have to come out that front gate.
Right.
Yeah, so if that's what the houses look like, then that would probably make some sense why Jephthah was caught off guard.
That. Right. Right.
Yeah. All right. So here's what it says. That Jephthah defeated the Ammonites, and the Ephraimites tried this ploy again. So Jephthah in Judges 12:1, remember, well, look, let me read it, and then you'll see how similar it is. And the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, why did you cross over to fight against the sons of Ammon without calling us to go with you? Sounds real similar to what had happened with Gideon, right?
Yeah.
We will burn down your house, or we will burn your house down on you. And Jephthah said to them, I and my people were at a great strife with the sons of Ammon, and I called you, and you did not deliver me from their hand. When I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life into my hands and crossed ahead against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gave them into my hand. Why have you come up to me this day to fight against me? So they Jephthah and his men fought against Ephraim and actually wiped a good share of them out.
Yeah.
It says 42,000 of them died.
Wow.
And remember, the Ammonites were on the Transjordan side. So as these people crossed, they had to say the word Shibboleth. And some of them, it said, would say it as Sibboleth, which was in Hebrew. That letter can represent two things if it doesn't if it's not pointed. Right. So they wouldn't have known how to say it. And it says if they said it the wrong way, they actually got killed.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. But I thought it was funny. The Ephraimites tried the same ploy as they did with Gideon, and this time it doesn't work.
Yeah,
and
for
Jephthah
sure.
lets them have it.
Yeah.
So I thought that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
All right. Then we got some minor judges. We've got just a few there. Ibzan means swift, Elon means oak, and Abdon means service. Some people have suggested that there's a judge from every tribe, but if that's true, it's really hard to know. You can see the ones that here have question marks with them. and
Yeah.
even the Shamgar. It's really hard to know what tribes they're from. So I
Yeah.
don't think you could prove that. It
Yeah.
might be possible, but I don't know that you could know that. All right, now we got our best one. Well, not actually our best one, but one God
Right.
uses in some amazing ways.
Yeah.
All
A
right, we got
familiar one.
Samson. Yeah,
Yeah.
familiar.
Yeah.
First, the Philistines have problems with the Philistines for 40 years. So again, you
Yep.
can see what's got it. And it says the angel of the Lord foretold Samson's birth, that he was going to be a Nazarite from his birth. Verse 16 says, the angel of God, the Lord said to Manoah, though you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord. For Manoah did not know he was the angel of the Lord. So
Hmm.
there's that verse. I also think that one's actually pretty important. Notice it doesn't say, if you're going to do that, offer it to me. He says, offer it to the
Hmm.
Lord. So I
Yeah.
think that's making a distinction between the angel of the Lord and God.
Yeah.
And that verse seems to be pretty clear there.
Yeah.
Okay, then you got Samson's marriage. He was going to marry this first woman. It says she's in Timnah, and you can see the little map there. They have. He lives in the Israelites, so on the east or to the right
Hmm.
of our map here, and the
Yeah.
Philistines are on the left there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So during the marriage, Samson proposes this riddle: out of the eater comes something sweet. Out of the
Yeah.
something comes. I can't remember the thing, but it's the idea of that. Remember, he found this lion and he ripped it
Right.
apart, and when he came back, it had the bees in it, and
Yeah.
he had tasted some of that. So
Yeah.
so he did it, and at first they couldn't figure it out. For 6 days, they couldn't figure it out. Then
Right.
his wife talks him into telling her what it was, and so they actually got the riddle.
Yeah.
So Samson then goes and kills 30 Philistines and gives them their clothing to these people, because that was what it was. If they won, they had to get him more clothes, and so
Right.
yeah. So when they actually could propound the riddle, he then had to give them, but he did it from their own people.
Right.
Another thing that's pretty amazing, he kills 1,000 Philistines with a jawbone.
Yeah.
That, I can see, jawbone is probably, 12 inches long, something like
Hmm.
that. And it is kind of sharp, but I would think, Philistines are going to have weapons and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
that's a pretty amazing feat, if you ask me.
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
That tells you just how strong this guy is.
Yeah.
Another thing that tells it is Samson takes the gates of Gaza, and
Hmm.
he carries it to Hebron. So here's Gaza right here, and here's Hebron. That is about 38 miles, and it's
Wow.
uphill. Okay,
Yeah.
going towards Hebron is going to be uphill. He's carrying the gates of the city on his back. Gates of the city are usually made out of logs.
Right.
And I'm
Yeah.
going, that's another amazing thing.
Yeah.
So it just tells you how really strong he was. Then you've got the story of Samson and Delilah, and almost everybody
Sure.
knows that story. He gets his hair cut, and then he's as weak as any other person.
Yeah.
They then take him to Gaza, to the temple of Dagon,
Hmm.
and that's so it'd be like a war trophy. And so they took him to
Yeah.
their god, thinking their god had given them Samson, their
Right.
biggest enemy. So
Yeah.
that's what that's all about. Samson's mocked and blinded. His hair
Hmm.
begins to grow, though, and he's brought to the temple, and he's put between two pillars, the main pillars. And it says that he killed 3,000 Philistines by pulling the house down on them.
Right.
Okay, here's what verse 30 says. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bent with all his might, so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were within it. So the dead who he killed in his death were more than those he killed in his life.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing. Sad, but kind of amazing. Here's a
Yeah.
picture of what a Philistine temple would look like. And this right in the middle there is kind of where the posts would be. Apparently the one they're talking about has two posts right next to each other. And
Right.
it's all built so that it's resting on those two pillars. And once you
Yeah.
pull that down, it brings the whole
Yeah. The whole thing
building
would
down.
collapse.
Yeah. So it's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Now we've got these two appendices. Oh, wait. First of
Right.
all, for Samson,
Okay.
remember, you've got the Holy Spirit on him, but he's certainly not a good example You don't ever tell your children to, raise up and be like Samson, right?
Right.
Yeah. So the Holy Spirit is using him because God has a job for him. Earlier it
Yeah.
said that God was going to use him to defeat the Philistines, and
Yeah.
that was the job. It wasn't his moral character. It was that the Spirit of God was going to come on him, and he was going to display this strength to
Yeah.
deliver the Israelites.
I think
So
that goes back to your point too about Jephthah.
yeah,
The thing that you didn't really take to as a very convincing argument that having the Holy Spirit upon you doesn't necessarily mean you follow the law all the time. Because Samson doesn't really seem to be that great example of that.
he sure isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Now, I want you to talk about these two appendices.
Yeah.
First of all, there's an interesting structure here. I'll show you in a minute. But before I do that, I just want to read the first 5 verses in verse 17 to let you know that virtually everything in here is wrong. And then they're going to have, at the end of it, it's going to say, and there was no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes.
Right.
Well, you just saw that. So let me explain.
Right.
So verse 17:1 says, now there was a man in the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. He said to his mother, the 11 pieces of silver which were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse in my hearing, behold, the silver is with me, and I took it. Okay, first of all, you've got a son stealing from a family member, which from a parent is it's just like not heard of. That's just disgusting.
Yeah.
But then the mother says, blessed be my son by the Lord. What is that?
Yeah.
Okay. In their mind, what they used to think of is that a curse was like a time bomb, and it would go around seeking until it got the person who stole it, like whoever stole the money, it would go on them, and then it would curse them.
Yeah.
She sends a blessing in hopes that the blessing will neutralize the curse so that so her son will not be hurt.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just how they understood curses and blessings.
Yeah.
So that's what she's doing. She's saying, okay, I don't want my son to die, so I'm going to send out this blessing to him. Okay, that's how they understood it. All right. Then he returned 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, and his mother said, "I wholly dedicate the silver from my hand to the Lord, for my son to make a graven image and a molten image. Now, therefore, I will return it to you." I'm going, wait a minute. What's this making an image that God had told him never to do that, right?
Yeah.
All right. Then look at verse 4. So when he returned the silver to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made a graven image and a molten image out of and it was in the house of Micah.
So she didn't even use all the.
Yeah. God just got ripped off, right? 1,100 pieces, and he gave him 200. Yeah, I'm thinking God got ripped off there. Yeah. All right, and then it says they were in the house of Micah. So Micah's using these as like a household idol now. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household idols and consecrated one of his sons that he might become a priest. He's in the hill country of Ephraim. He's not a Levite, right. and so he's just picking one of his sons to become a priest for them. How is he's not a Levite? How is that happening?
Right.
Okay, so I just showed you that to show you that everything in there is wrong. And then the next verse says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." And then in verse 18:1, it says, "In those days there was no king of Israel." 19:1 says, "Now it came about in those days there were no king of Israel." And then 21:25 says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." So I think that's like a chiasm holding those sections together. Yeah. So you've got the very first verse and the very last verse that are exactly alike. And then the two chapters in between, they're similar. So I think this is like a chiasm to pull this thing together. Yeah. And I would actually argue that 17 and 18 talks about the religious deterioration. Here's Micah setting up his own images and stuff like that. Yeah. And then the whole thing was, remember, he's got this Levite that comes along, and he hires him to be a like a priest in his own thing. And he's thinking, well, God will really bless me now because now I got a Levite as it. Well, A Levite, first of all, that's not what they're supposed to be doing, and you're not
Right.
supposed to have your own religious temple in your house.
For
So
sure, yeah.
it's just everything is wrong there. And first of all, why is this Levite going? It says he's from. I think it says it's from Bethlehem, and I'm going. Why is this priest even walking around? Doesn't he always have a job? Isn't he
Right.
always supposed to be teaching God's law to the people?
Yeah.
I'm figuring that this is the time of the judges, and they're not paying their Levites, so the Levites are starving, so they
Yeah.
have to go find a job.
Right.
And I think that's what's going on. So that's another thing that's wrong here.
Wow.
All right. Then the Gibeonites deed, remember that they take this concubine, and almost the same thing that happened at Sodom and Gomorrah happens with the Gibeonite servant, or this servant of that priest or the Levite.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's the moral deterioration. So you've got these at the very end of the book, probably telling you just how bad the time is like.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly when these events actually occurred, but it's really good at telling you that these are terrible times, and this is what it's like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's the purpose for those 4 chapters.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
All right, here's our conclusion. The time of the judges was a very evil time. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. That becomes like the key phrase.
Yeah.
God was gracious to raise up judges to deliver Israel multiple times. In fact, 13 times he does that. Okay? Should we use fleeces today to determine God's will?
Definitely not.
All right. It's always backfired on me anyway. And then, was Jephthah a godly person?
Boy, it kind of doesn't seem like it.
No, I don't think so. And I think he does a stupid vow and then gets caught in it. Yeah.
Right.
Again, God could have stopped it, but if God makes a way for you to get out of a stupid vow and you don't read his word and know that, that's back on you again, isn't it? So I think that's what's happening here. And then should our children emulate Samson?
No, hopefully not. Yeah.
Okay. So that's our stuff on the judges. We've got some really important lessons. And I think if there's one takeaway from this, it's how wicked the time was, but also how gracious God was. Even in this time when his people are the worst, he keeps coming back to help them. And I'm just amazed at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good setup for what's coming later. Yeah. Really, this really demonstrates a pattern we're going to continue to see.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I wished it wasn't true, but I'm afraid it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's our podcast for today.
That's Judges, okay. And what do we have next?
Well, we've got Ruth, and then we'll go into the Kings, or Samuel first, and then Kings.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds really good. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Wegner.
You're welcome. See you soon.